Hey, my name is Christopher Breedlove, and I just wanted to give a little bit of context setting as we jump into this call today. This is a part of a global activation community call series that we've started to do this year. And the idea is that we've kind of recognized that burners kind of self-organize around certain areas, which is like communities and events, ecosystems, and this one is about civics and civic activation. And so this is the very first call. I really want to thank Molly Rose for helping me co-host this, as well as Emma and Sage, who are in the background here helping us run this today. And so this particular call around civic activation, what we've noticed at BWBHQ is that, as burners are thinking about what it means to be civically responsible and being citizens in the world, they're engaging in the democratic process as one way to participate. And so either as a voter or maybe as a civil servant. And we've seen an uptick in people reaching out to us in BWB about people who are discussing running for public office. And we were really curious, does Black Rock City inspire people possibly to become politicians? Do the 10 principles have anything to do with how people think about policy? And so we're super excited to be speaking with 3 burners today who have just or are currently running for elected office. And like I said, this is the very first of our civic activation calls. And so thanks so much for everybody being here. I'm going to pass it back to you, Molly.
Thanks, Christopher. We are going to give each of the 3 incredible humans who are on our panel today a chance to tell you a bit about themselves in their own words. And before I turn it over to them, I'd just like to briefly introduce them and say that we're joined today by Vasquez, who is a burner who chooses to camp with a different crew every year to get a different experience of the playa. She is the youngest and first immigrant Afro-Latina to be appointed to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is the largest utility in the country, and is a former candidate for Los Angeles City Council. We are also joined by Alexis Hill from Spark, Nevada. She's basically a local to Black Rock City, and she's lived with Mission Country Club in Black Rock City since 2013 and is a candidate for Washoe County Commissioner. And last but certainly not least, we're honored to be joined by Sarah Iannarone, who's a civic leader and a mom who's camped with Skinny Kitty over the years in Black Rock City and is a mayoral candidate in Portland, Oregon. Thank you all for being here today so much. And with that, why don't we turn it over to Aura for a brief introduction. Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure being here. And I just want to start before I talk about myself. I just want to start with this anecdote and the reason why I also wanted to participate on this panel. So I am the first Afro-Latina. I'm originally from Colombia. I immigrated to this country with my family 25 years ago, escaping the war on drugs. A very sad time in the history of my country, and moving to New York, where I went to school. I became an undocumented student. Later, I worked for a Congress member. I decided to leave government because I didn't feel that our elected officials were really working for people like myself, working class people, people that had dreams, that were entrepreneurs, that worked hard to get the things that they need. And the system wasn't really quite working for us. But it wasn't maybe about 2 years ago when I decided to run for city council. And in Los Angeles, the second largest city in the United States, the city council holds a lot of power. So when I went and checked in with a few people in the political world here in Los Angeles about my idea about running for office, so some of the questions that they asked me was, have you ever been, convicted to a crime? Have you been to jail? Is there any, overdose or some sort of DUI? And I said, no, I have a very clean record. The only maybe thing that I've done is going to Burning Man. Does that count as a really bad thing? Or is this something that, it's like a bad thing? And it really got me to think, because I had so many wonderful experiences at Burning Man. And a lot of the reasons why I decided to run came from my experience at Burning Man and how life-changing it has been for me. And I think we're gonna talk a little bit more about other things, but you know, my platform was much related around radical inclusion, really cultivating community, and this idea that the resources that we have could be fostered better and could be more sustainable if we share them. Similarly to what we do for a week, you know, at Burning Man. And you know, I'm the first Afro-Latina to ever run for office in Los Angeles. And for me, it was very important to integrate that part of me that is very authentic. So, you know, also radical self-acceptance, that I am who I am, that I have my curly hairs, that I have an accent, that I was not born in this country, that I have a lot to offer because diversity is actually our greatest strength. But sometimes we don't see it that way. So I think I'm gonna stop there. I don't wanna take all the time so my fellow panelists can elaborate, but I will definitely, you know, share more.
Thank you, Auda. Yeah, we're excited to dive in. And next, if we want to hear from Alexis, just a little bit of an introduction.
Hello, everyone. I grew up in Sparks, Nevada, and I have been driven to get into public service my whole life, really starting from walking to school and not having proper sidewalks or crosswalks. And I knew even then that there was a problem with that. And so I have, I went away for college. I came back to Sparks to fix those sidewalks. I then started a master's degree in public policy and public administration at UNR, and worked in the nonprofit fields, Lake Tahoe Shakespeare Festival, and ran a nonprofit for special needs children called Kids and Horses. And then I started the city of Reno. I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do at the city of Reno in arts, culture, and events. Through civic celebration and public art, we have really pulled the community together and created community pride. And I started in the position in 2012 when the city was deep in the recession and there wasn't a lot of hope. And so we scrounged up some money to buy the sculpture by Jeff Schomburg, or Laura Kempton, and fabricated by Jeff Schomburg, Believe, in our city plaza. And that really started a lot of the Burning Man sculptures that we have around town, and an expectation by our community that we're going to have a new Burning Man sculpture. And really our identity has been around that pride of, yeah, we host Burning Man. We are the gateway to Burning Man. And before, our community used to think, oh no, that's a crazy week and we can't go grocery shopping, but people have really embraced it. And sadly, not having Burning Man in our community has been a really tough thing for us economically. This has been, it's one of the biggest flight days of the year that in our airport, and just the economic devastation of not having Burning Man this year is really tough for our community. So I was so honored to come on this panel and talk about my journey and why I'm running for office and why I want to make a difference in our community. And just like in the times when I knew that we deserve better, to have better infrastructure, I was just seeing that on the county commission level, that wasn't happening. And so that's why I'm running for office, to serve my community on a higher level. And I can't wait to chat with everyone about that.
Thank you, Alexis. I know we're excited to dive in more about Reno and the intersection of politics and Burning Man out there. And last but certainly not least, Sarah, we'd love to hear a few words of introduction from yourself.
Well, it's so wonderful to see everyone when we don't get to be together in real life. Gathering and seeing beautiful faces on Zoom is the next best thing. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Sarah Iannarone. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am running to be the next mayor of Portland, Oregon. I feel it's such a critical time for cities like mine, and even cities like Black Rock City, to model the future that we want to see. I call it tactical optimism, but what I'm talking about is bringing people together to tap into the best of us, even as we face the worst of us. For those of you who are in Portland right now, I am with you in spirit. We're challenged a little bit in our city. The president, who's quite a terror, especially on Twitter, has put us in his sights, attacking us in large part, I think, because he envies what we have here in community and the ways that we are working to be a low carbon, community-led, equitable, prosperous city, you know, decoupled from the military industrial complex and decoupled from the fossil fuel industry, and making sure that we're carving out right livelihoods for our people. And so much about what brought me to Burning Man in the first place is what brings me to running for mayor of Portland. Yeah, I'm a mom and I'm a small business founder. I opened a brunch restaurant in Portland. I know it's very almost Portlandia trope-like, but my training is in sustainable city planning. And so I was educated at Portland State University and spent a decade hosting civic leaders from cities all around the world who would come to Portland to say, what's going on here? What's so special? How are you growing your tree canopy even as your population grows? And how are you taking this Superfund site that's your river and creating a beach right in your downtown? And how are you, redirecting investments from freeway expansion to investments in active transportation and public transportation? But what we've seen, even as our reputation around the world has grown, is that Portland has really been falling behind in making sure that the good life accrues to everyone equitably here. What we've done is we've created, in some ways, an elite enclave where the good life is available to you if you are affluent, if you live in a certain zip code, if you have a certain skin color, but for others, that is not the case. And so I'm really running for mayor of Portland right now because I believe that the antidote to hate is an inclusive city. The antidote to racism is economic opportunity and prosperity for everyone. The antidote to all of the things that we're seeking to beat back can be arrived at when we come at it from a community perspective, where everyone is included, where everyone's voices matters, and where you are focused on the things you want as opposed to the things you don't want. And I'm looking forward to drilling into a lot more of that with you here today. Thanks again for having me. And I think my contact info is in the chat in case you want to follow up afterward as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we are going to share all of our panelists' contact information in the chat. And before we dive into kind of our first question, Sarah, I'd actually just love to dig a little bit deeper and hear just a little bit more about when you did discover Burning Man in your journey and where that fit in.
I actually see Evelyn on the call right now from Black Rock Boutique. Shout out for clothing so many burners over the years. What a wonderful camp. But the way that I met Evelyn was through a project here in Portland called the City Repair Project. And that was an effort to reclaim intersections around our city and bring a community gathering place right to the asphalt where two roads cross. And the act of bringing people together to create a place, a gathering place in the commons, is something that's anathema in our capitalist society, where every square inch of land is commodified and trying to have the value of that extracted for some profit seeking. And so what we did through the City Repair Project was really try to bring people together in community to make the city a lively, vibrant place. And many of those folks were doing that work in Portland, but then I also started to hear that they were doing similar things on the playa as they were building out Black Rock City along these principles that are actually, you know, as someone who's got a background in urban planning, when I heard, you know, there was like this garden city model and how there was this idealized urban form that would come to fruition annually, I thought I have to be a part of that. So I was able to go camp actually with people not in my city initially. That's how I ended up with a Skinny Kitty Tea House, which is from the Bay Area, just because I felt it would allow me to be a little bit more free to be with people that I didn't know and to really explore that through a new lens. But ultimately what that did was connect me back to people in my own city. So not just through the Black Black Rock Boutique, but through people I would meet on the playa, and they would say, oh, I do this or I do that in Portland or other places around the world. So again, it all comes back to the community that you build, and the relationships you create, and how that enriches your experience and how that increases your capacity to be a good actor in the world. Because what we've seen is the cooperation that goes on at Burning Man is really what's at the heart of it all, is that when we come together, we're better individuals than really when we try to go it alone.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. I love that history. And I just want to say I'm a huge fan of the City Repair Project. There's been some copies of some of that project here in the Bay Area, which I think is super inspiring. I want to ask you all a somewhat similar question, and I think we're going to start with Audra real quick. But, I'm really curious, as you look at your kind of civic and political careers, and then as you look at the experience that you have in Black Rock City, I'm curious, what similarities do you find between those two worlds? Has Burning Man in any way influenced your inspiration to be civically involved, or do those experiences that you've had at Burning Man influence how you think about policy and your experiences? So Audra, I'd love to point that to you first.
Absolutely, thank you. So I think the similarities come down to, where I have been able to see the best in humanity attending Burning Man. And, I have been an organizer since I was a little girl, 11 years old, working on environmental issues mostly, and in social justice issues. So for me, this idea that we could actually come together and collaborate and be wonderful and create and share and uplift the best of us was something that was very aligned with my personal values and the reasons why I decided to run for city council. I was, my race, I ran against an incumbent of 30 years. I was the grassroots candidate, and with someone that has so many innovative ideas, that has worked with urban planners, that work with the largest utility in the country and brought things like the Solar for Renters program. But I will constantly talk about these terms of radical inclusion, and people will think that this was a terminology that I kind of came up with. And what I think they didn't really know is that this was a term that I actually adopted from Burning Man. So it's just been kind of interesting to see. And also, I was a big Bernie Sanders supporter, of course, and even hear him about the revolution, and almost hear so many similarities in terms of our values and how they align to the things that we experience at Burning Man. One of the things that I was really supporting in my agenda as I was running for office was arts, and how that can help as a way to heal our city, and how beautification of our city was something important, which is something that folks don't really, when you think about city planning, sometimes this is something that you don't really think about. And lastly, I just want to say that I feel like Burning Man really highlights the best on people. That you can go out there, whether it's with your camp or by yourself, that you can walk, bike, whatever it is that you want to do, and find yourself with a friend. Find yourself with someone that is curious about you. And I'm sad to say that I feel in the world, we have lost that, a little bit of that innocence, and how through our political process, we can enable more of that. We can actually foster more of that, that we have enough resources for us, and also for us to share with other people, which is something that I think also we practice really well, at Burning Man, which is self-reliance, and how we rely on the community. So for example, in all of these concepts around homelessness and our unsheltered community, and in LA being a huge issue here, how do we turn the hand, and how do we look at this issue from a lens that this is our problem, not their problem or somebody else's, problem. So this is how I have been able to, I was able to apply these principles to my race. But again, they're not foreign to my life. I mean, this is something that I apply every day to my life. And I was lucky that I was introduced to Burning Man by a very wonderful group that taught me about Burning Man as a lifestyle and not just as a place where you go and get crazy, or I don't know, like party all week or run around naked or whatever it is that people have, whatever ideas that people have about what happens at Burning Man. But it's actually something that is transformational, and that is personally transformational, and it's also community transformational.
Awesome. Thank you, Aura. Alexis, I would love to ask you the same question, and really one of the things I noticed that Aura said too, so I'd also add to the question, is I'm curious how you think about the principles in relation to, do they fit or do they not fit for you?
Well, I was so lucky to go out to Burning Man the first year for work. The city really started to embrace Burning Man, and I fell in love and stayed a little longer because I just couldn't leave. And I was like, what is this magical place and these magical people? And so I feel very fortunate that I was introduced in that way. And I would say that this isn't exactly a principle, but I think it's definitely something that burners embrace and believe in, is that you need to bring the weirdos to the table. And I've been doing that my whole career. And I think that at Burning Man, that everyone is their own kind of weird, and ensuring that voices are heard. And so I think that that is a really important part of running for office, being in office, working for government. But also it's just a really important part of Burning Man. Everyone is so diverse, and you meet so many people with amazing backgrounds who you'd never meet normally. And so I feel like I got like the United Nations in my backyard when Burning Man comes to town, and that's so lucky. As far as the principles are concerned, going back to this idea of the unsheltered population, or people who are struggling due to COVID-19, which it's 35% of the unemployed folks in our community, maybe even more, have not even received their insurance, for unemployment insurance in our community. And that's been for, close to 6 months. And so radical self-reliance is probably something that is on the playa, not necessarily in government. And something I feel like what is a great principle is ensuring that we realize that we're all one community and we want to support each other. And so those principles, I think, are really important, of coming together and taking care of each other, especially in this time. And what is really great is that with the tie into Burning Man and the city of Reno, is we have so many incredible artists and makers in our community. And they have done amazing things. I wanted to show a slideshow, but we have an artist, Jeff Johnson. He's a neon artist, and he did a pop-up neon piece right as COVID started and people were in quarantine. It said home, and the O was a Nevada shape. And it really gave people joy. And the city did a lot of those kind of art pieces throughout the community to really give people hope. And when our Black Lives Matter protests came through town and there was some vandalism to our city hall, we worked together with a local artist and did some incredible Black Lives Matter murals on the boarded up buildings at City Hall. And I really encourage you to check out Josie Rock. He's a local muralist, and he did those murals. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to bring new voices and ideas, but also be compassionate in how we're dealing with these new challenges.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Sarah, I'd love to ask you the same question. How do you look at your run for political office with your Burning Man culture, and what do you think about the principles?
Yeah, thanks for that important question. And I'll probably follow a little bit just the path Alexis started to lead us down. And I love that you said you need to bring the weirdos to the table. I wrote that down. I'm going to keep it because it's so important, that notion that everybody's voice matters and everyone has something to add. I'm going to give a very concrete example because there's something that Portland's struggling right now with, which is our homelessness crisis. And we have at any given night, approximately 4,000 people without permanent housing and another 16 to 20,000 people who are housing insecure. And those are, of course, minimum numbers. And when I think back to my time on the playa and the different places that I would sleep at night, potentially, how I would find water for myself, how I would make sure that I had the food that I needed. It helped me cultivate, I believe, a great deal of connection with just the very basic needs that people are meeting day to day. And that may seem, you know, a little bit somber as we're celebrating some of the other parts here that are a little bit larger and utopian. But honestly, some of the very practical things, street medics, and the way that we're relying in Portland on things like street medics right now, making sure that the people who are unhoused here, that we have water brigades from the neighborhoods getting clean drinking water to folks who are sleeping in tents outside right now, making sure that we're bringing community builders together to build temporary shelters that can then become tiny house villages that we hope can transform into permanent housing. But this notion that when we come together and build things, it can be iterative, but that we have to start with meeting people's basic needs, hydration, protection from the elements, making sure that they're safe and making sure that their bodies are safe from assault, from abuse, from violence, things like that. Actually, the way that we practice that on the playa, or at least that we had committed to, and most of us would, has helped me shape how I engage with people who are without housing, because on the playa, none of us have our permanent home with us. Another thing is transportation. So on the playa, I feel the happiest when it comes to moving about, because I'm a car-free Portlander, and there's a lot of single occupancy vehicles that roam the streets of my city back and forth across big, wide freeways and big, wide streets. And on the playa, the most I ever had to watch out for getting hit by was an art car, right? Or maybe a water truck. And so the sense of leisure that I got in mobility and getting to understand how we get to move through that space with a bit of freedom when we're not dependent on the automobile, I think would be nice if more people could experience that out in the real world, because there's a liberty to that. We often talk about, you know, cars as freedom, but I see not having to be dependent on a car as a bit of freedom too. Another one would be just the notion of civics, and where do we share, and how do we make sure, you know, that we're gathering in the spaces to do. I think about the census, right? I have a good government platform in my campaign that's all about how can we make sure that everybody is connected, because if we're going to have a healthy democracy to beat back, you know, all of these ugly things that are going on around us, what are the very basics? So making sure everyone's counted, making sure that we have the connections and communications, even the radio. So it's these very basic things of city building that remind us what's important. And I bring those to my work day to day. I would say those are probably the biggest ones, and I'm sure we're gonna have more time to unpack them. So I'll stop talking, we can move on.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a really inspiring answer. And also thank you to everybody who's participating in the chat box, answering this question from y'all's own perspective. Please keep it up. In a similar vein to what Sarah was just mentioning, I'd kind of like to come back to Alexis, because, you know, one of the questions that we had as a teaser is, what if your city was a lot more like Black Rock City? And Reno is really one of those really interesting places that burners feel connected to. And we'd love to just hear from you, Alexis, to explore a little bit more of Reno's political scene and how it is or may be affected by Burning Man and your experience with that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be running for office if it weren't for Burning Man, because the demographics of our community had shifted and changed substantially that I could win this race against a two-term incumbent. So Reno, it has drawn incredible people here because of Burning Man. Y'all have learned about our community and how livable it is, and have come here, and I'm so grateful for that. Not only that I'm running for office selfishly, but also that you're really bringing diverse voices to our community. And I think that diversity is making Reno a better place to live. We need new voices, or else the community dies. If you don't have these really interesting people contributing to the civic dialogue. So I would say that that has been a really incredible part of Reno and our development. And also, I mean, we are very car focused, and to go on what Sarah said, I want to push a movement of putting the map of Black Rock City over the center of Reno where the city plaza is, and showing people how you could easily bike to many places in our community. And if you realize that it really isn't as big as you think it is. And so that idea of, because there are so many local burners, to show them that there are alternative ways to get around, especially with more interesting things to look at on the way, which is part of that public art and beautification that we've been doing in my office. So that has been incredible as well. We have the Burning Man office in Reno, which has been really special for us because we feel like we're even closer to the Burning Man organization, and many of the founders come down and go to civic celebrations in our community. And so we do feel like a second home to Burning Man, or maybe a third home because of the Bay Area and then Black Rock City. But it has been an incredible experience, and all the artists who have moved here and who are attracted to this area. The generator wouldn't exist without Burning Man. Art Tech wouldn't exist without Burning Man. Many of the maker spaces that have created our 4th Street district, which is a brewery arts district now, that wouldn't have existed without these creative people. So part of my platform is to ensure that we can keep them and keep our neighborhoods authentic, and ensure that we stay affordable, because the other issue is, because of Burning Man, we have Tesla, and that has increased our home prices substantially in our community. Even during the pandemic, you would think that home prices would have decreased, but we have just hit the highest median home price that we've ever had in our community. So these are really big issues to tackle, but I want to keep our Burning Man spirit and keep these folks engaged in our community and making our community better.
Thanks, Alexis. And, you know, I just want to call out too, I thought what was interesting is in the previous question before, all of 3 of you mentioned homelessness as a big issue in your city. And I know that that's something across the case on the Pacific Coast, but I did think it was interesting how all of you kind of looped that into how Burning Man influenced you. I just wanted to call that out. I'm actually going to throw this back to Sarah for a moment. But Sarah, I was curious, you know, kind of looking at your background in urban planning and sustainable cities, I'm curious, when you came to Burning Man for the first time, did you look at Burning Man through that lens? And do you think that Portland can learn more from Black Rock City in that sense, or can Black Rock City actually learn more from Portland? How do you think about it like that?
It's interesting. I don't know that it's an either or. It always comes down to scale, right? And where do we close our loops? When you think about what happens on the playa, the idea of leave no trace is fantastic. But then I remember seeing along the roadway after I would leave, when people would dump their trash, right? There are always these externalities of when we care for something in this closed loop system, where does the edge of that loop you know, begin and end, and what does it mean for us to think about the energy that it took to get on the playa? I would think about all of the fossil fuels that were burned to get people from their homes in various places to the playa, where we would have low carbon solutions. So it's always the tensions for me about how are we doing our very best to minimize our impact on the planet, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, and making sure that we are trying to leave no trace. I do think that those are important principles, and without principles, we never gain anything. And one of my favorite parts of the Burning Man experience is always the idealization, right? This utopian vision of realizing the principles, but that knowing that in the act of realizing, that's where the work is done. We may never accomplish them 100%, but that when we come together in those shared values, then that's where we're working together on realizing the better future. And the innovation really comes from that. I do think that there are some things with regard to the organization of the place. You know, it is pretty linear out there, and Portland's a little bit wonkier in the way that our streets run. I have a map behind me. That's our downtown. It looks a little bit more like Black Rock, but I think we have places to learn from each other for sure, but ultimately it's what you do with what you learn on the playa once you leave the playa, and then do you bring the best of your place with you when you go to the playa, and that really should hold whether we're going to the playa or visiting our next door neighbor.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I kind of want to kick it back over to Auda, and the question that I'm kind of thinking about is that you mentioned that before you ran in an election, you've been an activist and a community organizer for a long time, and you also have this identity as a burner. So I'm curious, how do these identities support one another, and are there ever moments where they don't and they're challenged?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have been a rebel and troublemaker of sorts at heart. You know, I grew up in a home where my parents were always very involved in issues with our community. So I grew up, you know, with watching my mom cook, you know, empanadas and selling them with their friends so that they could fundraise for after school programs for kids that didn't have the things that my family and my brothers and I enjoy. At age 11, I saw a science show about the ozone layer and learned about global warming back in the 80s. And went to speak to my principal. I asked her, what are we doing to mitigate the effects of global warming? And, you know, she posted the question that has been really instrumental in my career, which is, what are you going to do about it? And I went and I founded the first environmental club in my school. You know, and our job in those days was to ban aerosols, you remember, with the curls in the 80s and all that, and how that was the problem. And 30 years later, I found myself leading the largest environmental campaign in Los Angeles and getting LA off of coal, which is what has put Los Angeles to a path to 100% renewable energy. Later, when I became, you know, a young commissioner, I also helped divest from 3 coastal gas plants that were polluting communities of color and invest those resources into renewable energy that are going to get us closer to the future where we can protect our planet and the people that live in this beautiful planet, which is all of us. So, you know, I am a firm believer of integration. You are who you are. And much about my campaign was about embracing who you are. And a lot of times when, especially for a woman and a woman of color, we're not meant to run for office. We can only dare to be, you know, in a position of leadership. So for me, it was very important to be who I am, to be authentic, to wear, you know, my colors and my curls, and to also affirm that I was not going to hide a single piece of who I was through my campaign and through my career and through my life. Because we're in a moment in history where we're going through the worst pandemic, or the biggest pandemic that at least we know, and where we see so much domestic violence, mental health issues, just people with depression. The fact that we have not been able to unite, to do the things that we do, to go to the store, to wear the mask, which we, by the way, had plenty of practice, we burners, so we are a little ahead of the game. But you know, but how do we fully embrace this idea that government looks like us, that government looks like me and like you, and that government sometimes looks like we're running around in tutus and a bicycle in the desert because we want to connect with other people, and we want to also connect with ourselves and discover other pieces of ourselves and heal. We forget that the political process is much about healing and bringing people a space where they can shine. So, you know, much of my life as a burner is not separated from my life, you know, as a candidate, as an activist, and as a you know, as somebody that plays in the political sphere, you know, in in Los Angeles. And my hope is, and in fact, we thought about this when I was running for office. I wanted to gather my Burning Man friends and create a Burning Man video about me running for office as a burner. And my fellow ladies, that Sarah and Alexis, that are running for office, that was actually twofold. I wanted to do it because I wanted to tell the world that Burning Man is not a boogeyman, that not everybody's getting loaded and drunk, that not only billionaires go to Burning Man, that is not a racist place, that is not that only white people go to Burning Man, that you have to have money to go to Burning Man, that you either a hippie, running around in order for, I wanted to tell people that people like me also go to Burning Man and find it helpful, and it thinks it's amazing. So we wanted to create this video because I wanted to tell my story before it was getting to the press and it was told in a different way, and because I wanted the community to rally up people like ourselves so that we can have the support and the enthusiasm that we need to win. I mean, this should be, we create something so amazing every year. We should also be a political force. That to me, it comes really hand by hand. Like it's really together.
Thanks, Ora. All right, so looking back at that data that we had from that original poll, over 50% of the people in this room are interested in someday running for political office, which I think is just awesome. Yeah, Alexis putting her hands up. And so I guess I wanted to ask, I mean, there's no better way to learn than from people who have done it or are doing it currently. And I want to start with Alexis, but Alexis, what would you say to people who are thinking about running for political office? What have you learned so far?
Just do it. Don't ask for permission to do it. I am at the point of reaching out to some donors, and one donor told me, like, I didn't know you were gonna run, like thinking like I had to ask for permission to run for office. You don't. And if it's, look at the demographics of the seat, but even if they're not necessarily in your favor, or it could even be a nonpartisan race, so it may not matter. My race happens to be partisan, but and then look at who you're running against and see if it's something that is doable as far as what the community thinks about this person, whether the community knows about this person. But I would say the one thing about running for office is that it's very scary because you have to put yourself out there, but it is so rewarding because you did do that. I'm actually, my last day at the city of Reno is on Friday. I'm committing 100% to my campaign because I don't think that I can win this and show the citizens how committed I am to doing this job unless I do that. And so it's taking a risk, and hopefully you have a good support system and people who keep you humble, because you have really great days where you're like, I'm amazing. And then other days where you're like, everyone hates me. So it's trying to be, walking that line. And so I would say also, find a mentor, someone who can support you and perhaps even help you fundraise. Unlike Sarah, I'm having to, raise all the money, and my opponent is an incumbent who developers just adore. So it is a challenge, but it's again very winnable. But I would say I would have benefited greatly if someone would have put me under their wing to kind of support me, help me with the lists and all those kind of things. And I plan on doing that now. Even if I don't win, I want to support other people who run. And there's great organizations like Run for Something that you should look into, who are supporting young progressive candidates. And Emily's List is supporting women candidates. So there's a lot of resources out there. And if you reach out to me after the election, I can help you, but just give me a little space until November 3rd. But I would just say, do it, believe in yourself and do it.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on your last day coming up. I saw someone in the chat box say that they were going to miss you in the city, but hopefully you'll just be there in another way. And I love it. Just do it and find a mentor. Sarah, what would you say for people who are interested in running for political office?
I want to echo a little bit of Aura's advice to be yourself. You know, this can be a time when you're running for office, there can be a lot of pressure to bend to something what people expect of you. But especially in these challenging times where we have a lot of ideologies competing, authenticity and staying true to yourself is true power. And it's something that no one can take from you. But that takes courage. And beyond courage, there's a fearlessness that I think a lot of burners are open to, which is nothing, the sense of nothing to lose and everything to gain when I explore the world. And also the notion of preparation. You know, for as much as we talk about Burning Man being temporary, everyone who's been a part of it knows that it takes weeks or months or years of preparation to realize what actually becomes the interactive festival that we have there. And I know that what you do is you build and you build and you build. I ran in 2016 and came in third place. Now I'm in a runoff with an incumbent who's one of the richest, most powerful people in the state of Oregon, and I'm about to kick his butt. So what you have to do is stick with it. But that's, again, you're not going it alone. So that notion of preparation and fearlessness and authenticity, but don't get knocked off your square. And I think that goes for politics or anything where we're trying to lead, because, you know, politics is service, it's service of leadership, but there's a lot of other service that I know burners engage in, and that authenticity and that fearlessness and that courage to just be yourself and help in the ways that you want to help, regardless of who's giving you permission to do that, are key, because we need every single one of us queued up, attending to their passion. Because if people aren't engaged through their passion and through their real selves, we're not going to make progress on the problems that our generation is facing. We really have to get real about that.
Awesome. I think that's always a good reminder that, you know, one race isn't the whole thing, and that it also takes a long time to build these coalitions. Aura, what do you think?
Yeah, so, oh God, guys. So, you know, I came to run for office with such a altruistic, you know, as an activist community organizing, and I wouldn't change it that way. But if you're planning to run for office or you're kind of curious, understand your why is very important, because you will return to that over and over to a point that you will have dreams about it. Because you have to talk to people to get to get support, whether it's endorsements or money. You spend hours and hours calling people, asking them for support, whether it's donations or whether it's come from bank for me or walk with me or whatever it is. So understand your why, because your why is what's gonna hold you strong. And it's the thing that you're gonna come back to and say, this is why I'm running. This is why I'm doing this, and this sucks, and people hate me, or people love me, or there's a bunch of creepy people around me because they're expecting to have something that I can give them eventually when I win. So it's a very House of Cards scene, and I'm not even exaggerating, and I see my fellow candidates nodding. So that's number one. Talk to your family, because you're gonna need a real support group, because running for office is really hard. And if you are a good-hearted person, like if you have a good heart and you're coming into this for like the good reasons, because you want to help people, because you want to better your community, it's gonna be pretty devastating to see every day like the sad reality of our political process. And much of my race was to also change that paradigm, change that personality. You know, we were very in my race, we were very inclusive. How do you show up in solidarity? What does solidarity means? You know, so have like a support group. Call your homegirls, your guy friends, your ex-boyfriends, your future husband, whatever it is, and you know, and tell them like, I'm gonna run for office and I'm gonna need all hands on deck. It's gotta be all about me right now. So, you know, please just be there for me. The third thing that I would recommend people to know is to have a real assessment of where you are at. A lot of people come into this because they think it's glamorous or it's cool and AOC won, so I can also do it. And understand if you actually can do this. You have to fundraise. There's a fundraising goal. There's a strategy. There's a political game that gets played. So if you don't know what this is, like Sarah mentioned, go ahead and find somebody. Alexis took Emerge, I believe. I'm a fellow Emerge. There's tons of trainings. There's tons of things for women. We need more women in politics, but more so for all of you that are watching, we need you to step up and support people like us. And maybe it's not financially, but maybe it's making phone calls. Maybe it's sharing it with your networks. Maybe you know how to make cool graphics and you can do that. Maybe you know how to make videos. You can make a bunch of videos. Maybe maybe you have other friends that can support. To change everything, it takes everyone. This is not my only job. This is not Sarah's. This is not Alexis. And whether we are in different locations running, we are all interconnected. And that's another thing that we know about Burning Man. It doesn't matter where you are. You can go to China and you find a fellow burner and it's like family. It's like, it's the community. So that's no different here. That's no different when you're running for office. So I encourage you to do it. It's gonna be scary. You're gonna get cold feet. Don't worry about that. Put your feet in warm water and just do it.
Thank you, Aura. I know we're just circling the drain on time. And so our kind of final question as we head into election season, there are plenty of people who don't want to run for office, right? So do you each have maybe just one quick idea or tip for folks to get involved in the democratic process? And yeah, it could be either any of you. Alexis.
I would say that registering with your registrar's office to work the poll stations for early voting, if you have those, or voting day of, the people who typically volunteer for those positions are elderly and at risk. And we really need to make sure that this election is seen as organized and fair, so we have the right outcomes and we don't have insanity after November 3rd. So do what you can in your community to volunteer for that.
Sarah, any one tip or idea?
I'm going to go back to what I started with, which is tactical optimism. There is a lot of disillusionment. There's frustration. There are people who feel left out by the major parties. Whatever it is right now, you have to find what it takes for you to be able to surmount that and stay engaged, because this is the fight of our lifetimes. We're battling actually to help our democracy survive in this election. So whether you're engaged locally with a progressive candidate who reflects your values and that keeps you in it and helps you turn out the vote, those people will vote up ballot. Whether you're working at the national level, those people you turn out will come down ballot. So just make sure that even if it's just an hour a week that you're phone banking, making sure you're registered to vote and that your neighbors are registered to vote, that you do what you can to take care of yourself so that you can surmount the fatigue, you can surmount the disillusionment, you can surmount the frustration and stay in it, because we need you. We need all of the good people in this fight right now. And I don't mean to oversell it. Divisiveness in my city, I cannot stress to you enough how much we need every single person who shares these values to stay engaged this election cycle. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I believe that politics are always local. If you have, in LA, we have something called the Neighborhood Council. Go ahead and run. Even if you have no idea about anything about government or local office or anything like that. Go and represent your neighborhood, represent your neighbors, get to know them. Volunteer for one of your local campaigns. If you find a candidate that speaks to you, go ahead and support them. Go and walk with them. Well, not anymore because we're on COVID, but make phone calls, text, do all those other things. And I know that right now, a lot of us, or I'm speaking for myself, feel the democratic process and the Democrats are failing us, that they're not radical enough, that they are not, that they don't have working class people values, like they're not putting our values and our needs and our self-interest first. that we see once again another cycle where the elite is running the show. But we need to step up because they are only a reflection of who we are. Just like we are a reflection of who they are. As much as we hate this concept, it is. So the only way that we can change that is by some of us running, or all of us running, by all of us getting involved in the democratic clubs. You can find out, you can Google and find out democratic clubs where you can inject these ideas, and when you can inject also the Burning Man, principles. And in that way it start, changing just how our political process is even. So get involved, and there's so many other places, and you don't need to run for office either. There are so many other things that you can do, but learn how, step back from complaining on Twitter so much and criticizing so much, and step up on being more involved so that you can be a player in changing the way things are.
Thank you so much. We want to officially close the call so that no one feels like they can't hop off or attend to other things. We are very grateful that our panelists are going to be able to stick around for a few minutes to answer some questions. We want to take a moment to appreciate Aura Vasquez, Alexis Hill, and Sarah Iannarone again for taking the time to join us in this conversation today. If you are looking to connect with these panelists, you can easily find them on Google, and we are dropping their email addresses and social media handles into the chat box in case you'd like to follow up with any of them directly. Thank you to all of our participants who attended live with us today or who are watching this conversation in the multiverse, and to Sage and Emma who have been supporting the call behind the scenes. During the panel, Sage posed a question for discussion in the chat box around how you all feel that your burner experience has influenced how you look at civic or political participation. Sage, are you ready to bring up that word cloud? Nice. We've got a lot in there. So let's leave it up so that people can zoom in and check it out. We hope that you're all feeling as inspired as we are after this conversation. We really want you all to be able to find and share support with other burners. Please visit our volunteers worldwide on Facebook to share your initiatives and find one another. If there's enough interest, we may also host a Burners Without Borders community roundup this fall to highlight all of the burner projects around voter participation, or to connect burners who are getting involved in the democratic process. And lastly, y'all can always email bwb@burningman.org for more information or to let us know about your initiatives. So we're gonna turn off the recording and move into a more informal chat. And thank you to everyone who has to go and is dropping off. We are past our hour, and it's just been such a great conversation.
I'm staying, so.
We do have a couple of questions that came up in the chat box. And so I'll just go ahead and throw one of them out there, which was from David Nelson Gall. I don't know if he is still on the call, but his question was, how much of community is built from shared values versus aligning people to a shared set of values? And any of our panelists who are on, it wasn't to anyone.
The thing is that values so people act out of their own self-interest, and this is just me as a community organizer, and I'm speaking it from that perspective. People act out of their own self-interest. Something you cared about, you do something about it. So our shared values is what kind of bring us together. And sometimes I care about Burning Man, and I cared about involving more people in the political process. And look at all of us. We came here for that reason, because we care. And sometimes it's different. We have two burners, Sarah and Alexis, that are running. So we come to support them and show solidarity. So at the end of the day, values is what motivates also people. That's why when we tell stories, we talk about stories from a sharing our values perspective. And, you know, as you see, our presidential folks do this really well. They talk a lot about values. They don't sit there and say, we're gonna do this policy and we're gonna do that policy and we're gonna, you know, they talk about terms, or they talk about ideas or feelings, or they talk about things that are gonna evoke like our, you know, like our values. So that's how I will like interpret that question.
Well, I find that many people from different backgrounds and different parties actually have very similar values. There's that old cliche adage about, you know, what is, you know, how can you align the Sierra Club with hunter groups? And it's because hunter groups also want conservation. And so you would think that they're like diametrically opposed type of organizations. But I find that when I speak to voters, people want quality of life, and they want elected officials that will stand up for long-term good decision making for their community. And so if they can feel like they can trust you in that realm, there isn't a ton of persuasion that should be happening. It should just be speaking to the community where they're already at. So that I don't think, I mean, yes, I think that when it comes to particular policies, there is a lot of education, but hopefully that happens, you know, after you're elected and you're pushing through innovative approaches to solving your community's issues. But as far as getting people aligned with who you are and excited about your messaging, it's pretty easy to find common ground with people.
Yeah, I would agree. It's about identifying shared values, and values really don't do much until you operationalize them and put them into action, right? And that's where I think the Burning Man values really come into play, is that notion that where do you find the shared values to bring people together? But then it's that act. I call civic engaging, the courage to dream together that future based on those values. I don't have to agree with every one of my neighbors on how we live our lives, or even what our neighborhood should look like, because, you know, you get 100 people in a room and you have 100 opinions. But do we all want safe streets? Yes. Do we all want our children to not go to bed hungry? Yes. Do we want everyone to have a roof over their head? Yes. And then the role of leaders then is to help us guide us, right, and help everyone bring their various talents together, so that as we're bringing this vision that we create together across what we've identified, we share. And at any given time, those may change. You know, in my city last year, if you would have asked me, the top thing that we were focused on was climate change. Now, in the wake of George Floyd's tragic murder, we're really focused on police reform. That doesn't mean that our values have changed or who we are changes, but it means that we have to take our focus on equity and inclusion and a representative city and apply those values in different ways. And again, we're going to come together and dream about what the future of public safety looks like here, even if we may not be putting, you know, 100% of our energy into thinking about what the just transition looks like here.
Great. We pulled one more question out of the chat box from earlier. And so I'm going to read it out. And this was from Sunnyside and Woodside Mutual Aid. Question was, I'm curious to hear what you all would say to burners who are disillusioned with our political system. Burning Man is inherently an anarchic model, and I'm feeling some dissonance between embracing the culture and value system of Burning Man and also becoming part of the incumbent political system, which I think is a super interesting question.
I'm so excited that you asked this one. I'm going to just jump in and go first, because when I saw it, I wanted to answer it, and I'm so glad that we did. it's the beauty in the tensions, right? And when you think about a communitarian anarchist framework, and when you think about what is the tension between individual liberty, between our mutual aid, and between collectivism, and when we come together in community buildings and create systems, it's always about the tension as we traverse the various scales in which we're engaging. And this is where I find it so engaging in the problem solving, right? Like, we get to jump those scales between optimizing individual empowerment and liberty, and really looking at the collective good and the whole, and where's the interplay between them. I think that's a delightful question, and I do enjoy looking at communitarian anarchism as a framework. So thanks for asking that, because I think that the answering of that question is the task that we face in future years as we work through some of these challenges that we seem to be stuck on and not making progress. If we can work through that tension, I think we're going to have better outcomes on the other side of it.
I think if you do not participate, then things will get worse, just on a practical level. And government, representative government, works slowly. And I think coming at it with an approach of challenging your elected officials to focus enough on your top 3 issues in your community and work towards fixing that. That's why your terms can be like 3 to 4 years, so you can really try to get something done, but it may be a small something. And I think there is one issue that wasn't really covered, but with elected officials being on social media, there seems to be this weird focus of having wins when you do like a photo op, and it's not a real win. And I think challenging your elected officials to give you real wins and holding them accountable. And sadly, that is engagement and participation in the process. And we need you to do that, or things will get worse. We need people to continue to engage, even though it can be give you disillusionment, and it can be heartbreaking when you have a loss. But this is your community. You should fight for it, and you should hold us accountable.
Well, so, the disillusion is not just at the Burning Man community. I feel like the disillusion is happening in a lot of different communities. We see our African American community really rising up and screaming for support and for a change. So this is not unique to Burning Man. The thing with Burning Man is that, we have a community that is composed by a lot of different actors and folks, and people from so many different walks of life that can be construed as anarchists. But some other people might not feel that way, might not feel that Burning Man, kind of has that rooting. I definitely see it as a little libertarian, but I believe that in not taking action is an action. So sitting back and criticizing, or just sitting back and like, I hate Biden, oh my God, Kamala, or whatever it is also problematic. And then we can go into the rabbit hole of the lesser of the two evils and all that I'm not gonna get into right now. But the call here is that you need to get involved, because there's tons of things that are happening at the local level that have nothing to do with Trump or Biden or Kamala or any of them, or Bernie or any of them. There's a lot, especially stuff around, again, homelessness, our climate change plan. I am so glad that Sarah is running for mayor, because mayors have such a huge impact. At a county level, if you guys don't know, Alexis, that is running for a larger, this is where we implement climate action. This is how we fight, against the climate emergency that we're living in, right now. And for those of you that are delusional, there's no time for that. really. There's no time for that. And also, you can only take people to this and the spectrum for so long. There are people that are going to be like, okay, maybe let me try, but what gives me hope and what keeps me going is to see every day. Like I found it after my race ended in March 3rd, and we were just less than 1,000 votes shy from our goal, from winning. And all of us started a mutual aid on the face of COVID-19 pandemic. And what gives me hope is seeing how people are so resilient and how coming together we have changed, maybe a little bit, maybe a lot, but that getting involved is really the part that is fun, is therapeutic, and that it really is going to bring us about change. So for those skeptical folks, I mean, your inaction is also an action, and your inaction is also causing a huge issue in our political process. And imagine, in my district, we're 250,000 people. And usually in elections, only 12,000 people vote. I mean, guys, if we were to get half of the people voting, and if we were to get them to vote our way, imagine the world might be very, very different. So I think we all need to get involved, and we need to just kind of confront our delusion and understand that we're living in an ecosystem where we are all interrelated and that we're all connected. And therefore, we have to, act and step up and work together.
I'm going to pull out another question, which I think is kind of cool, because it's kind of asking about this clash of values from Cantfish. Cantfish asked, I would like to know how the values of inclusion and collaboration of Burning Man could enter into society if the structure and philosophy of the United States capitalistic society is based on individuality, which I think is an interesting question about kind of the opposing forces there.
Well, I think I forgot which panelist brought up the idea that, I think it's Ara, you brought up the idea that people are self-interested by nature. And so I think there is appeals that you have to make, that I have to make, even with policies that I have for our homeless and sheltered populations, to talk about the long-term fiscal impacts and how they're actually the more fiscal responsible thing to do housing first, and to do all these policies that communities who fix chronic homelessness and veterans homelessness are doing. And so I think that is one way to do it, but I do see some issues with that rugged individualism. We're seeing that with people refusing to wear masks when we all know it's a community good. And so, but I do think the next generation, I don't necessarily think my generation, although I think that we're finally getting into power, the millennials, but the next generation is seeing this and they're sick of it. And I do think there will be a change in what America's ideals will look like. I'm very hopeful about that. But that is one of the ways that, as far as getting things done, is really talking to people in the way that they sometimes need to hear a message. It's not all about these are our fellow citizens, we should take care of each other. You sometimes have to talk about it in a very individualistic way.
I dropped a link in the chat of an op-ed piece I wrote a couple of years ago about how we can combat NIMBYism. And what I talked about is that it's going to be really leadership helping bring us together around those, I call them here, clearly expressed, easy to measure goals in the short term, but those can be really values driven, right? And that's where it doesn't matter what your personal belief about this is if we come together collectively, say, to eradicate people sleeping on the streets, then we're going to do that by whatever means possible, and we're going to measure that. But I think that that's one of the things that why leadership is so important right now, because it is about bringing people together. We can't all just be working as individuals on this. And I'm afraid I'm going to need to hop off. I have to go deal with something on my campaign. I can't stay all the way till 4:30, but I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. I learned so much from spending this time with you, and it was great to meet the other candidates. Thank you for running. You seem like you'll be fantastic leaders and already are, and everyone else, stay engaged. Thanks so much for inviting me today.
Bye, Sarah. Thanks so much for being here with us today. And Alexis and Nora, if you're, I think we're going to keep the room open for another 4 minutes. And I was going to ask this question from John. How do you use the arts, say theater, in your community education efforts? I thought that was an interesting one too.
Oh, I was an art. Oh, go ahead. Wait, where are you, Alexis? Do you want to go ahead? Okay. So I was an organizer for a long time for the Sierra Club. You guys, the Sierra Club is an environmental organization. It's one of the oldest, very established, very, you know, has a pretty older track record. John Muir was the founder of the Sierra Club. And, you know, I come from a background of immigrant rights, you know, activism and such. So it's quite emotional, you know. And with the Sierra Club, I got really to explore the arts. So, you know, fighting fossil fuel extraction and you know, just all of the incentives that the fossil fuel gets that hinders the deployment of more renewables. We started doing a lot of die-ins. So we had like this kind of paint, like black paint, and it was basically we will paint ourselves with like fossil fuel, like it's oil or something, and we will go to City Hall and do die-ins. And that was extremely important because one of the things that we gathered was a lot of press. So a lot of press came to see us all painted on, you know, and also people that usually don't like to go speak at City Hall or you know, be in a forum or just like give, you know, testimony on a hearing. This was a way for them to express themselves through, you know, through the arts. So that was one thing that we did. The other thing that we did in my campaign, we allowed people to come and make signs of why they were voting for me. So I'm voting for Aura because she's fighting for workers. I'm voting for Aura because she's fighting for renters. I'm voting for Aura because she cares about our planet. And people will make, you know, we had like all of our very grassrootsy stuff, and that's the way that also people got to connect with other people through my campaign and also express themselves. My campaign had a big emphasis on the arts, supporting local artists and using that as a healing process for our community. More murals, painting, you know, the electrical boxes with the stories of the people in our neighborhoods and the people that make, you know, our community amazing. So that's how we integrated, you know, the arts, at least in my experience.
Well, the great thing about the arts is that it helps you see the world in a different way. And so I think that anyone who has access to the arts, they can really have a better perspective on what the world is about and perhaps envision a better world. And that's why when at the city, my major initiatives were public art, we're funding free performances, we're funding theater in the schools, and really trying to get funding for art's sake. I think that we are so utilitarian in the way that we think about things that we want to say like, well, it will help you learn to count, or it will help you learn how certain things work. But the arts for art's sakes is really important as well. And I think that having government funding of that is extremely important, because not everyone has access to it, especially local theater companies. And right now, I do worry about these arts organizations and how, and artists, and how they're going to be supported. Tonight, there's a nationwide light up things red in support of live music and live entertainment. So check that out in your local community and how you can support local artists, because this is a really tough time to be an artist, but it's extremely important, and Burning Man just exemplifies all of that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both so much for that. And I know there's some other questions in here, but we really want to respect both of your time. You both stayed after what we had originally said. And so I really want to thank you, Alexis and Nora, for being here with us today. I think this was a super inspiring talk. Again, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.